if you think about what are the most valuable companies on the planet, the first types of companies that come to mind is probably a Google or Facebook or an NVIDIA. But, and this wasn't always true, one of the most valuable companies on the planet is LVMH. The bigger difference is it's handmade by a craftsperson. And so I think basically the way it will evolve is that all goods effectively become luxury goods. In San Francisco, when you take a Waymo, it costs more than a real Uber.
Yeah.
Because it's nicer. About every single person living today lives better than a king 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. AI and all technology will replace the economic work that it can replace. And there is something different about AI in that today it can replace like a pretty good amount of economic work. Over time, it might replace like most forms of productive economic work with one exception. The exception is basically this.
But thinking of building a company or already run a company that is not registered, but you want to get registered, I've looked at a lot of solutions, and one of the best ones in the market right now is Doula. I reached out to Arjun, who is actually the founder of Doula.com. I asked him if he'd like to work together on the podcast. He was like, of course. Doula is sort of a platform that helps founders and businesses form and manage US companies, regardless of where they live. If someone is living in India, for example, and wants to start a company and get registered in the US, he or she can do it by using Doula.com. Doula helps in forming the company. It can be an LLC, C Corp, or you name it. Doula offers a US address and a bank account to users, which can allow you to conduct business transactions that you can receive and send payments no matter where you live in the world from the United States. And other than that, they also provide tax consultation to the users, which is an incredible feature. And Doula simplifies the process of establishing and managing a US company, and especially for founders that are not in the US. And regardless of where they live, you can get your company registered with Doula.com. To check out Doula, go to doula.com/exerton. That is DOOLA.com/EXERTON.
Hey Siqi, how are you? Hope you're doing well.
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
I've been eyeing this for such a long day, and I'm so glad we got the chance to do this. Let's start with, who is Siqi? Who are you?
I'm a dude who runs a company called Runway. And Runway is a next generation finance platform that makes business successful, understandable to people inside and outside of finance. And I'm a longtime founder. I think I'm 4-time CEO now, 3-time founder, and I'm a pretty prolific angel investor. And outside of that, I live in the Bay Area with my wife and 2 girls. That's the high level. You know, I've always had this framework about leverage that I think about a lot, where even in the 6th grade, I thought about what it is to create value and create impact in the world. And one of the theories I had, and I just like coming up with these theories all the time, like something like that a lot, is that when you think about someone digging a hole, right? Let's say you get paid to dig a hole. You get paid while you're digging the hole, right? But if you stop digging, you don't get paid anymore. But then if you like build a machine that'll dig the hole for you, you can get paid while the machine is working, and you only have to build a machine once, right? And that's basically what technology and software is. Like, that is technology and software engineering leverage, right? You're creating value even while you're sleeping. And that's why builders, engineers get paid more than a typical person digging a hole, right? But then when you look at it on a larger level, when you have to build very complicated products that can create more value over longer periods of time, often you'll find that you can't build it on your own, right? You have to build it with other people. And so figuring out how to coordinate groups of people to build something more complex that can create sustaining value over long periods of time is even higher leverage. And so, like, on a economic basis, right, people complain about executive salaries a lot, but from like a market basis, it kind of makes sense if you think about it from first principles, right? In the same way that an engineer gets paid more for engineering leverage, an executive or a PM gets paid more sometimes. Oh, I guess not all PMs, but like the executives generally get paid more than an individual contributor engineer. And that's, I think, the economic explanation why, right? You can create like a lot more value by organizing people to build more complicated things that create even more value. And so that's generally how I thought about, okay, if that's how the world works, how do I try to create the most impact possible?
Do you think if you look at it in that sense, is leverage a relative term?
I guess it's relative to a lack of leverage, right? Like a lack of leverage would be you are doing effectively manual labor, right? Like if you are working in, let's say, an iPhone factory, like scrubbing a thing, you do not have a lot of personal leverage in that work, right? The amount of leverage you have it's basically 1-to-1 to time and effort of you personally.
Yeah.
Right? And so when you have leverage, you get, more return per time and effort invested than you otherwise would have, right? In there's like many different ways to describe this, right? And I think it's one of the most powerful forces in the world, other than like say compound returns. If you think about in the military terms, in the military conflict, there is this concept called a force multiplier, right? And that is what technology is. So this idea that if you have like 1,000 soldiers on one side, 1,000 soldiers on the other side, the army that's going to have the guns or the rockets or the tanks is obviously going to win against like 1,000 people holding spears or swords, right? And those things that allow them to defeat an army of 1,000 people or 10,000 people without technology, that's called a force multiplier. And so, in theory, if you have enough guns for 1,000 people, that same 1,000 people could defeat an army of 100,000 people, right? Given infinite bullets, and that is a force multiplier of 100x, right? And so leverage is basically a force multiplier in economic terms for people or your own work.
But it's like with AI too.
Really, all technology is a form of leverage and force multiplier, right? I think that's why technology has been so important as a source of value creation in the world, right? Like that's literally why, before, like you think back to the earlier forms of technology, right? Like before we, what is it when we domesticated like cattle, right? In order to get flour, we had to like, grind the grain ourselves to make flour, but then we could attach like a wheel and a big mortar pestle to an animal and it'll do it for us. That's technology. And then we invented machines so that, you could like attach a paddle wheel to a river and it'll do it for us now, right? And that's technology. And then we invented electricity and then it'll just like do it, because we turn on electricity and so on and so on. All of those things are forms of leverage. And AI is, you can draw a continuous stream back to domestication of cattle in terms of like what leverage is, right? AI allows us to do new kinds of knowledge, productive work, and multiply our own leverage by 10, 100, a million X.
But a lot of what we have seen since AI has increased in hype is like people are talking about it replacing humans on jobs that we do or that people do. Where is the line between creating leverage and creating more than enough leverage that replaces people? Where does the line end or begin? Or does that even matter rather?
Where does the line, I think a really useful illustration is like, where does the line between cars and internal combustion engines end with horses, right? And
Yes.
all transportation was used to basically be driven manually and mostly by horses. And then you had a steam engine and now you have cars. and you have a lot fewer horses doing work. You have a lot of fewer people who know how to ride a horse, but you still have people who ride horses. It's still an Olympic sport, right? And I think that's kind of the right way to think about it, but I think on a much broader scale, AI and all technology will replace the economic work that it can replace. And there is something different about AI in that today it can replace like a pretty good amount of economic work. Over time, it might replace like most forms of productive economic work, in which case, where does the line drawn between like what AI does and what humans do? What is the equivalent of people still riding horses? And I think my answer is that the thing there, it feels inevitable to be over a long enough period of time that it will do all work, right? And it will do everything that you could economically productively do better than a human, with one exception, in theory. And the exception is basically this: the bets that I believe in making here is that if you look at what changes over time, what's interesting is to focus on what doesn't change, right? What is Lindy? And one of the things that is least likely to change is human biology. And when you think about our biology, it's evolved over millennia to make us like the best species at winning both survival competition, but also like status and sexual competition. Like evolution is, in some ways has made us like incredibly good at status seeking and status competition. That's led to art and architecture and all kinds of like really interesting, but also like non-directly connected to survival types of things. And I think as technology progresses, more and more work will be towards status seeking and status competition. And so what I mean by that is, if even in a world where AI will do everything that it can possibly do, in that world, the things that will be more valuable are going to be the things that are provably made by a person. Because that's like a luxury good. That's like, oh, this is a real person and their internal talent and capabilities and intelligence and creativity was able to create this without the aid of AI. And those are the things that we value. And therefore, that will still be an economically productive form of work in the same way that riding a horse is, even though cars exist. So that is going to be a really interesting world to live in, because, if we're already seeing it happen, I would argue. So if you think about what are the most valuable companies on the planet, the first types of companies that come to mind is probably a Google or Facebook or an NVIDIA. But, and this wasn't always true, one of the most valuable companies on the planet is LVMH. The thing about luxury goods is that, in terms of utility, a bag from Louis Vuitton, it's the same bag functionally as a plastic bag. Like, you can just put shit in it and you can carry it around. The difference is it has more expensive materials, sure, but the bigger difference is it's handmade by a craftsperson. And so I think basically the way it will evolve is that all goods effectively become luxury goods.
Wow. Oh, damn. Yeah, that's a great point. I use this but I think like the amount that I've pondered about this is the end person that is getting the bag in here, for example, or whatever the problem is being solved. He or she only cares about the problem being solved rather than actually the means to do it, like everyone does. So it's the exact same example as Uber versus Waymo. The person wants to get from one place to another, and they just want a car to get to. They just want to use that car or any car to get there. What role does the means really play in that, for example?
Yeah,
Like they can't.
that's a great question. And so what I'm arguing is that what you said about people only valuing the utility,
Yeah.
I'm arguing that that will change, and I'm arguing that has already changed.
Yep.
And so, like, you know, in America, the public transportation isn't great.
Yeah.
And you could just take the bus, or you could take the subway instead of taking Waymo, instead of taking Uber. But people use Uber because it's nicer.
Yeah.
And that's already happening, right? And if you look at Waymo, the thing that people don't talk about enough with Waymo is that in San Francisco, when you take a Waymo, it costs more than a real Uber.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's nicer. So I think people are already through, if you look at luxury goods as a category, even look at airlines, right? Like business class has gotten larger in size and nicer over time in airlines. And now you have like airlines that are all business class. And the reason why this happens is like as technology increases leverage, the demand for these luxury goods will increase. And you take it to the limit where basically all utility is free, right? So I fully believe that like baseline utility of getting it from one place to another, will round at zero, getting food will round at a zero, all these different things. But our biological imperatives for status seeking will still need us to figure out some way of like differentiating value. And in that world, all economically valuable goods will just be luxury goods.
But hey, what do you makes it worth it?
Status and status, gains of status is the single strongest force that makes the world go around economically. And it is deeply biologically driven. So, you know, the short answer to your question is like, what makes it worth it is everything. And I think this is like, you know, maybe, I think it's unobvious, but it actually should not be that controversial. So, Charlie Munger had this great observation, and I think about this a lot. He said that most people think that what makes the world go round is greed, right? That's what drives the world. But he says they're wrong. What actually makes the world go round is envy. And I was like, that's perfect. It's envy. What makes envy different from greed is it's about competition. It's relative status, right? Just about every single person living today lives better than a king 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. They have access to nutrition and technology and that 2,000 years ago, like kings wouldn't dream of, right? And, you know, another way to think about this today is like, whether you are literally Bertrand Arnault or you're a person in a rural area in Africa, you have the ability, if, you know, assuming you have like some money, like you cannot buy a better phone as a trillionaire as anyone else on the planet. The best phone you can possibly buy is an iPhone. And so in that way, technology is this like great equalizer. And so, you know, as technology equalizes utility, what will remain is the deeply ingrained biological desire to status seek, to play games of envy. And that's what makes these things valuable. So like, you know, this is something I thought about in my first company. So back in 2007, I started a company called Serious Business, and we were selling virtual goods, right? Virtual goods and microtransactions very well understood today. But back then, people were like, and still to some extent today, people are like, why would you spend real money on a thing that's not real, on like a sticker, on a fake thing, right? How does it make any sense? And my the way I would explain this is like, did you ever buy a nice piece of clothing one time? They're like, yeah, maybe I bought a nice shoes, right? So here's my explanation for you. What you bought is about $5 worth of shoe and $100 worth of virtual goods, because you bought the brand, the status, the feel of it. And in a digital world, digital items have those qualities. It just didn't have the $5 worth of real items. And I think like that's basically how it's going to be in an AI world, except it won't just be virtual goods. All of the goods will probably need to be provably handmade, handcrafted in some way by a person. And people are going to say like, this bag is cool because a real person made it. Or this is a luxury ride to the airport. You know why? Because there's a real driver, right? And people are going to be like, oh shit, wow, amazing.
Do you think you seek status?
I think, of course, I seek status. I think every person seeks status. I think the people who think they don't seek status, in thinking that they don't, are trying to seek status in some way on an unconscious level. It's not a question of like whether someone does or don't. I think it is part of human nature to seek status, right? Like, I don't know whether you think you seek status or not, but like, you know,
Neither do I.
But I would argue, like, as humans do, like, just period, right? Like, you have a podcast, right? And you probably say to yourself, well, I'm doing it because I, am interested in sharing the knowledge of other people, experienced people, to other founders, and it'll do some great in the world. But the deeper underlying impulse is like, well, this is going to also benefit me in some way. It will have me become more connected. It'll set me up for future success in some way. And like on a very deep level, everything that we do, whether we know it or not, from philanthropy to creation, entrepreneurship, is driven by some form of status seeking.
Is that more for some people, whereas less for others? No.
I think like I think yes and no. I think like at the limits, like if you're like sort of like an extremely enlightened Buddha like monk figure and you're asked that, those people do exist. I'm talking about like you're basically, spiritually incredibly enlightened and you're like a bodhisattva, right? I think like outside of that, I think everyone is status seeking. I think to different degrees, but I think that it's subtle because the degree of status seeking is hard to gauge. Because, for example, someone who is like known for not being status seeking, I look at that as like, that means they're probably very good at status seeking. Like they've accumulated a tremendous amount of status in doing that, right? And so it doesn't even have to be intentional about it, but like what motivates people to like write a book, right? And what is like difficult to suss out is like you can have good intentions for the world and do things altruistically, but like that can often hide a deeper motivation of like, it also helps me status seeking, and that's like nice. And I think people are generally driven by both.
But isn't like people don't necessarily, even though most people I'd say would be aware if whether they're status seeking or not, but they don't want to say it out loud. Like society ostracizes it. Do you think that's a good thing?
That's a huge part, and this is why it makes it hard to gauge, right? Like, I think it's true that most people wouldn't want to say they're status seeking. I think that the other thing that I believe is that like it's very difficult to be self-aware. It's a continuous process. You can only like be more self-aware over time, but like I think the vast majority of people index pretty low on self-awareness. And in terms of like wanting to admit to the world whether you're status seeking or not, I think what's even sometimes more difficult is admitting to yourself that you're status seeking. Because it's so easy to say, I'm doing this for X good, Y good, right? Like, here is a really simple way, and I've explained this to people, like, some altruist volunteer at, let's say, a food bank, right, or something, and they're in there, they're serving the food, and they're like, okay, there is, I don't know how much status seeking is. I argue that there would be, but like they're clearly doing a good thing, right? Here's the thing, like, you could hire a person to work at the soup kitchen for like, $10 an hour, say, right? This person probably, let's say, is like makes $200 an hour. It would be far more actually altruistic for them to just donate a crap load of money instead. And instead of using that time and just go spend another hour coding and donate that money instead, over it, but they don't. And the reason why they don't is, while they're thinking they're doing the altruistic thing, what they're actually, will not admit to themselves, or maybe they do and they do it anyway, is that they do it because it feels good. They do it because it informs a part of identity, and they do it because it's a form of status seeking to be perceived as a person who volunteers in a soup kitchen. So across like all kinds of activity, you see this.
But then on the same line, like, even though like status seeking is a deep rooted part of like human biology, I'd say, how do you, as the world drifts more towards being status seeking, how do you get over the psychological part of being able to say that you seek status while having biologically, while everyone is seeking status?
I mean, I don't know that I'm encouraging anyone to say that they are.
Yeah.
Right. And the other thing is, like, I'm not saying status, like, the problem with like, talking about this is like, it implies that status seeking is somehow a bad thing. And I think it's useful to look at things like this passionately. Like, I don't think politics in an organization is a bad thing either. Right. Like, people say, oh, politics is toxic. It's like, no, like, when you think it is, that's the thing that actually increases likelihood of it being toxic. But when you recognize that politics inside an organization is a thing that exists when there's just more than two people in the room, it's just like people are trying to figure out, like, what is the status? What is the hierarchy? Like, subconsciously, if you know that that's what's happening, that you can manage it and harness it for good or for evil, right? And that's the thing that makes it toxic. So I don't know that you wanted to like tell people they're status seeking, like, whether you want to or not, it's up to you. But I think it's important to recognize like the true nature of yourself and people, and like what drives people, because I think it's actually like could be a great force, right? Like, because I believe the status seeking is a innate part of humans, every great thing that we've done is driven on some level, consciously or subconsciously, by that motivation.
Do you think starters exists only for, like, we took the example of bags, LVMH bags before? Do you think that can be replicated with software products too?
It has been. I mean, every MMO and every cosmetic in Fortnite is exactly that, right? You ask about utility versus like purpose, right? I don't know, like, kids play Fortnite, right? In Fortnite, all you buy are cosmetics. Therefore, by definition, nothing that you're purchasing economically has any in-world utility other than status.
Yep.
And it's an enormous business. So not only can you, it's already happening, and the companies doing this are already enormously large and profitable.
But that's more like a part of it. I'm talking about more specifically like companies like we'll just say Runway, for example. How do you guys leverage status if you do?
I don't know if we leverage it. I mean, I think, again, like everything is like fundamentally driven by it at a deep level. So, I'll explain like how we think about what Runway does and how we talk about it. So Runway helps people makes their businesses accessible, understandable. And the core of Runway is understanding. So when you look at the state of the art in terms of the finance market, you have all of these incumbent products that save the finance team time, that give them more controls, but are just built for only the finance team. And the idea is, if we can build great tools for the finance team and save them time, that's enough for them to create strategic impact and create clarity. And our belief is that that's not enough. Those are just table stakes, because saving time and giving controls and building only for the finance team, where you're going to end up with is you're going to try to collaborate and you're going to share a bunch of databases and spreadsheets with different people, and people outside the finance team don't have any idea what they're looking at. And only by increasing understanding through a really great tool for thought can we actually have finance create the impact that they're supposed to create. So that's sort of like the purpose of Runway's existence. How does status play into that? At a deep level, if we can build that product, then that is something that is valued within more of the departments within a company, right? It penetrates deeply within a company. And if it penetrates deeply with the company and you have a one holistic view for the first time, that increases the value of that company and it makes it more competitive, such that all the other companies want to get on it too. And inherently, if we create that kind of world where it's like the default for operating a business, that increases the status of everyone involved in the company, without question, both in terms of the prestige of the brand, prestige of the company, and in terms of economic returns from the impact, right? And money is probably the most direct pointer signal for status that we have in the world. And so, I'm reminded of like what Max Levchin was asked about money. Practically speaking, right? Once you have like more than, let's say, $100 million, right? Like, unless you're literally going to buy like boats or planes, like marginal utility of like the stuff that you could buy, it just like goes down to very close to zero, right? Like, you can only sleep in one bed at a time, drive one car at a time, be in one house at a time, right? And with that much money, you could live in any hotel you want for the rest of your life, right? The nicest ones. So then why does like someone like Max Levchin or Peter Thiel or whoever keep on doing things? And they say this repeatedly and explicitly, it's a way of keeping score. And it's like, yeah, right? Think about like, it's really interesting. Yeah, like Warren Buffett, right? And Bill Gates, they have the 99% pledge, right? They're giving money lifetimes. So like, if that doesn't tell you like what the role of money is, I don't know what does, right? It's like, at that point, it's not even like economically meaningful or interesting or makes a difference to them. It is purely a way of keeping score. And then the way you convert it into like social currency is you give it away.
But it's like, yeah, even though like whenever I look at this stuff, like Peter Thiel, Max Lipton, Warren Buffett, and all these people, by some standards, they have done what a lot of people that sort of like dream about or can't even dream about. Then why are they still seeking status, even though it is a biological part of them? But whereas they have almost everything to show for it.
When they already have everything to show for it, why do they keep on doing it?
Yep.
Yeah, I just think it's a biological imperative.
Well,
And I don't know that, I'm not saying like, the immediate motivation for someone like anyone or Max Levchin is to say like, I want to increase my status. But I'm saying like, evolutionary speaking, like what is probably deeply ingrained is like, they have to keep building. They have to keep on making, they have to like keep on creating impact in the world. That is driven at a much deeper level by optimizing for status in a biological sense, not even in a psychological sense. And so why do they do it? They do it because they're people and they have to do it.
do you think you keep building like they do too?
So, I don't have nearly, their net worth, but I will say that after I sold my first company, I didn't think if I really wanted to, I would need to work again. I could have just not worked. And this is back in 2012. And so
You worked at Zynga after that.
yeah, I left Zynga. Zynga just went public. And I left 6 months after an IPO. And I remember, and I went to Thailand. And I was thinking, I'm just going to chill on the beach for a while, for a couple of months. It's going to be great. And I just remember being bored out of my mind 2 weeks later. I was like, I got to do something. So I think, that stuck with me. Like, I think where AI will be, one of the great benefits of AI is that it'll create more of the same experience for people that I experience, which is that I know after that experience that right now I'm already on vacation, basically. That if I was able to do nothing, I would do exactly what I was doing right now, which is to work. And most people don't have that experience or relationship with work, right? Like they talk about work-life balance. It's a means of living and sustenance and survival. And that is a true reality for people. But I think what AI is going to make possible is the basic needs of life and sustenance will be taken care of. So everyone will have to figure out, okay, in a world where I don't need that, what would I do? And I think what people will find is that the thing to do is you will work.
Why do some people want work-life balance rather?
Well, I mean, because I think even talking about work-life balance, assumes a certain mental model of work and life. And the reason why people talk about work-life balance is they have this particular mental model. And the mental model is, I live life and I define life as waking up in the morning and having breakfast with my kids, driving them to school, and then I go to work and I come back and then I resume my life. I have dinner with the family. On the weekends, I go ride my bike. I watch some movies. I read some books. Those are the things that's my life. And in between that is the work that I have to do in order to pay for that life. That's inherently the mental model. And so when you have that mental model, then of course you want to balance between the two. You want to make sure that you're not working so much that you don't, get to live your life, but you're not making so little that you can't afford to live your life, right? So you want to have a balance between the two. Makes perfect sense. I think, that mental model of work, though, is informed by, I think most people are not particularly fulfilled in the work that they do. They're beholden to other people's agency, and it's not the most interesting, stimulating work. It's not fulfilling, which is true of, I think, most jobs. And so it's really understandable. But I think there is another mental model for work that I have that is within reach, not of everyone, but I think more and more people as technology increases wealth and happiness. And that is work and life are not a different thing. We as human beings, we have been evolved and society has evolved to create productive work, to be productive, right? Whether that's like making a pot or farming or creating software or creating great art or writing. Like a big part of what makes human beings humans is doing great work. You think about like when what sticks around and what we think about human beings as a species and a civilization, what we value the output of great people doing great work, whether that's like an amazing building or a statue or a software product or a phenomenal piece of art, right? Like Michelangelo and the Sistine Chapel. That was like years and years of a genius doing work. And we hold these people up as like the highest exemplars of humanity. So when we say like that isn't life, it just makes no sense. That is actually an integral, it's not all of life, but it is a very big part of it. And so, I think the right way to think about it is work is part of life and life is part of work. And how do you make sure that, your life is set up to do great, sustainable work over time? And you can do it without also taking breaks, without also having exposure to friends and family and society and culture and other works. But you also can't do it by not working either.
Like talking about great work, like the recent launch, like the Runway launch, it was almost on everyone's timeline. How did you guys put life in that? No pun intended.
It's hard to describe a process. I think like, I don't know.
It's great.
I don't think the process is actually important. Like, when people see something like that's interesting and good and memorable, the question is like, how did they do it? Like, what was the process? Like, what meetings do they have? And I think that is far less important than meaning and people. We try to have like really great people who share values, who give a shit, who want to raise the bar and push what's possible forward. So, and everyone tries to hire well, so I don't know how that differentiated that is. But I think the bigger thing is the desire and the courage to do something new and the confidence that makes you believe that you can do something new and the willingness to take the risk of the new thing not working. I think that's probably the bigger thing that I think is probably the rarest thing, or more rare than it should be. So, people like our website a lot and they talk about it. And, before Runway, it was linear people talk about linear website a lot. And everyone's like, wow, that is like great design, whether it's Runway linear, how did they do it? And what people did is like, they tried to do that. But the thing is like, there is at least a couple hundred of, there's an entire website is just like things like linear, right? There's like screenshots of like other companies that basically copied the linear design. And you can't name one of them. The only one you can name is linear. Why is that? The reason why is because they were the first, right? And so you have to have meaning and people who believe in doing things like that. That has to be the starting point. If you have a team who have a baseline level of high talent, but also are empowered and care about pushing the state of art forward, not just like doing what's been done before, and understand that taking risk is how you get to a new linear. And when you do something like that, it's not just 10% better, 20% better, but the outcome is like 10x, 100x better, right? Then the process and everything else is secondary. You'll figure out what the right process is for your team. But if you don't believe that in the first place, if you don't have the right people in the first place, it doesn't matter what process you use.
Like if I like relate this to your last point about putting life into work in some sense, like some of the best people do, like the greatest artists like Steve Jobs and people like that. What is the difference between the way in the way in which they build anything versus how others do it?
I mean, the first word that comes to mind is taste, but it's like taste is really hard to define, right? And everyone has different tastes. But I do think there is some spectrum of objectively bad and objectively good tastes, but it's like it's hard to nail down. But I think like that spectrum is likely to be like deeply human, deeply biological. I think like there's an element of a sense of beauty and the ability to make very complicated things very simple and beautiful. And I think in a nutshell, actually, the biggest difference is that they are good designers and they value design. And like I, for a long time, hesitated saying that answer because it seems like such an obvious thing. Like it's something a designer would say. It's something that people are like, oh yeah, design is valuable. But I hesitated to say that because like, when you talk to investors and you talk to like business people, right? There's so much of the attention, and also you can have so much success by getting all the other things really good, like really good sales, really good marketing, raise a shit ton of money, get a technology really good. There's plenty of examples of that. And I think those are the things that, by and large, people seem to care the most about as in the business world. And yet we have like Apple, who's like the largest company on the planet, and their differentiation is design and technology. It is both things, right? But like everyone has like gotten better at it and sort of try to emulate Apple, but it's still not like the thing that people say, oh, this is, very few companies will say like, this is the thing that differentiates us. This is the thing that defines us. It's like, we just like design better products and we can build better products. Because like when you talk to most people about that, are like, I don't know what that means. I don't know what should believe you. And how is that really differentiated against like you saying that or some other company saying that? And the consequence of that lack of ability to discern good and bad design is that it's undervalued. And so the answer is, the difference is, if you look at Steve Jobs and Linear and Notion and these products that we admire, Figma, they're just extraordinarily well designed. And people want to point to every other thing that they did differently. It's like, oh, they like had a community, or oh, they built it in C++ and they did this thing right, and they like learn from customers in this way. And people just are willing to point to the obvious and non-obvious thing. It's like, actually, no, the product was really good and well designed, and it was better than anyone else who designed it. And that's, yeah, for some reason, we aren't attracted to that answer.
I think design is one of the very few reasons I strive over to PayPal.
Yeah, I think that's right. Right? It's the holistic experience. That's right. Right? I think that's a really, good insight, right? Like people look at PayPal, look at Stripe, and it's like, well, what's the real difference? It seems really, really different, right? Like one's an API, another has a bunch of things, but and it's a developer platform, but the difference was the user experience of the design for developers, and that's exactly it. And people just undervalue that.
Do you think that, like, thinking on this more, the Stripe versus PayPal thing, do you think good design translates into other things in the product too? Like Stripe has an overall good design, which makes other parts better as compared to PayPal.
I mean, I think that's all part of design, right? Like how things fit with each other is definitely something that you have to design, like not just an individual product, but the architecture of your product and the ecosystem around it, and the architecture of how the team builds it, and the team structure and the values of it and the culture. All of those things have to be designed. And I think probably the most common case in terms of management and how we teach people to run businesses is like OKR, metrics driven. It's this machine and you operate it, but no, you have to design it. And it's not just like engineering. It's not just management. It's not just process. It's design. And I think that is just so deeply still undervalued in the world today.
We started with craftsmanship and we end with craftsmanship. I think this has been incredible. I learned a lot from this one. I hope you enjoyed it too.
Yeah.
One question which I like to end with, like I've been into startups, VCs and all these things, and that's like 11. What do you think is one fact that will blow 11-year-old me mind?
Man, I don't know. That's a tough one. What's a fact that would blow 11-year-old's mind? This is gonna sound really stupid, but there are a lot of people in the world, and most people are way more capable, way more thoughtful than you give people credit for. I think when I was 11-year-old, I thought I was a smart 11-year-old, and you have this internal dialogue and where it's all you had, and like I think I was 11, it felt like everyone else was an NPC. And I think the journey of the next 30 years was discovering the richness of everybody and all the things you don't know about them. For me, at least, that was a thing that I continued to get my mind blown about.
Yeah, that continues to blow 60-year-old me mind. But I think this is incredible. Thank you so much for taking the time out for this, and I hope you enjoyed it. I think that's it from my side. Anything you'd like to say?
Thank you. Yeah, I really enjoyed this. Yeah, some great questions.